The misty Chicago morning cloaked the city in an ethereal haze as Sarah Jenkins' weathered Toyota Camry rolled to a stop in front of the imposing limestone courthouse. The dashboard clock blinked 8:54 a.m., 6 minutes before her hearing. Her reflection in the rearview mirror revealed dark circles under her eyes, testament to the all-night video conference with Beijing investors that had secured a $300 million cybersecurity contract for Jenkins Technology Solutions. Sarah's hand brushed against the pearl necklace hidden beneath her coffee-stained MIT sweatshirt, her mother's only surviving heirloom. "Always keep your dignity, baby girl," her mother's voice echoed in her memory, even when they tried to strip it away. The pearls were her secret armor, a reminder of where she came from and how far she'd climbed. Officer Mike Peterson watched from his post as Sarah gathered her files from the passenger seat. His lip curled slightly at her casual attire and rushed demeanor. "Another one who doesn't take the court seriously," he muttered to his partner. If he bothered to look closer, he might have noticed the subtle elegance of her movement or the quiet confidence in her eyes. The same eyes that had stared down boardrooms full of skeptical venture capitalists. The courthouse security line stretched longer than usual, filled with a cross-section of Chicago's population. Business suits mixed with work uniforms, all waiting their turn at justice. Sarah stood patiently, her mind running calculations for a new encryption algorithm while the elderly security guard, Walt, methodically checked IDs. "Busy morning in traffic court," Walt remarked kindly as she passed through the metal detector. The pearl necklace set off a soft beep, and Sarah reflexively touched it through her sweatshirt. Walt noticed the gesture and the brief flash of emotion across her face. "Family heirloom?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness. "Those are the most precious things we carry," he said, waving her through with a grandfatherly smile. The marble halls echoed with footsteps as Sarah made her way to courtroom 4B. She passed a young mother struggling with a stroller, automatically reaching out to hold the heavy door open. The woman's grateful smile triggered memories of Sarah's own childhood, her mother working 3 jobs, yet still finding time to teach her daughter coding on a second-hand computer. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with anxiety and resignation. Sarah took a seat in the 3rd row, unbothered by the curious glances at her casual attire. She pulled out her phone, quickly scanning an urgent email from her CEO regarding a potential security breach at a major bank. Her fingers flew across the screen, dispatching her top team to handle the situation. A law student intern, Amanda Chen, sitting nearby, couldn't help but notice Sarah's rapid-fire typing and the complex strings of code visible on her screen. Amanda's eyes widened with recognition. She'd just read an article about Jenkins Technology Solutions in her cybersecurity law class. But before she could process this revelation, a sharp voice cut through the courtroom. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Richard Harrison presiding. The bailiff's announcement brought everyone to their feet. Judge Harrison swept in, his black robes billowing slightly as he took his seat. His steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses projected an image of authority, but the slight tremor in his hand as he arranged his papers betrayed his personal turmoil. His recent divorce and rejection from the prestigious Lake Shore Country Club had left him eager to assert control wherever he could find it. Sarah observed all this with the same keen attention to detail that had made her a tech industry pioneer. She noted the judge's defensive posture, the way his eyes barely skimmed over defendants before making decisions. She recognized the signs of a man who had stopped seeing individuals and started seeing categories, a dangerous tendency in someone tasked with delivering justice. As the clerk began calling cases, Sarah pulled up the dashboard camera footage on her phone, showing the obscured parking sign that had led to her citation. Years of business experience had taught her to always be prepared, even for something as seemingly minor as a parking violation. What she couldn't prepare for, however, was the perfect storm of prejudice and wounded pride that was about to unfold in courtroom 4B. Case number 2024 TR 45892. Sarah Jenkins, the clerk announced, her voice carrying the monotony of routine. Judge Richard Harrison glanced up from his bench, his gaze settling on Sarah with the practiced dismissiveness he'd perfected over 15 years on the bench. His morning had started poorly. His ex-wife's lawyer had called about missed alimony payments, and the Lakeshore Country Club's rejection letter still burned in his desk drawer at home. Another parking scofflaw, he thought, finding comfort in the familiar territory of passing judgment. Approached the podium. Miss Jenkins, he commanded, emphasizing her lack of title. Sarah rose with the same quiet grace she displayed in countless boardrooms. Her coffee-stained MIT sweatshirt drew disapproving glances from the court staff, but her posture remained impeccable, a trait ingrained by her grandmother, who'd raised her after her mother's passing. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice carrying the subtle authority that had convinced international investors to trust her with billions, "I'd like to present evidence regarding the parking violation in question." Judge Harrison cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Miss Jenkins, do you know how many people come through this court claiming they didn't see a sign?" He shuffled through her file, deliberately ignoring the flash drive she placed on the podium. "It says here you parked in a restricted zone on Michigan Avenue for over 3 hours. In the gallery, Amanda Chen, the law student, leaned forward. Something about Sarah's composure caught her attention. It wasn't the typical nervousness of a traffic court defendant. She pulled out her phone, discreetly searching for Sarah Jenkins, Michigan Avenue. "Your Honor, if I may," Sarah continued, her tone measured. "The sign in question was obscured by construction equipment. I have video evidence from my vehicle's dashboard camera that clearly shows." "Ms. Jenkins," the judge interrupted again, his voice taking on the condescending tone he reserved for those he deemed beneath his station. "Perhaps if you spent less time making excuses and more time observing your surroundings, we wouldn't be here wasting the court's valuable time." The courtroom fell silent. Even the seasoned bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's hand unconsciously touched her mother's pearls beneath her sweatshirt, drawing strength from their presence. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, warming to his lecture, "your casual appearance in this courtroom shows a distinct lack of respect for our judicial system." He gestured to her sweatshirt with barely concealed disdain, unaware that it was the same one she'd worn while coding the security system that protected his own bank accounts. Amanda's eyes widened as her phone displayed search results. Her sharp intake of breath drew curious glances from nearby observers. She'd just discovered exactly who was standing before Judge Harrison. Sarah remained unruffled. She'd faced down tech giants and corporate raiders with the same quiet confidence. "Your Honor, I apologize if my appearance offends the court. I came directly from an all-night emergency meeting regarding national cybersecurity protocols. However, my attire has no bearing on the facts of this case." Judge Harrison's face flushed at her composed response. In his mind, this was insolence, not dignity. "Ms. Jenkins, let me be clear. This court deals with facts, not excuses. The fact is, you parked illegally. The fact is, you're here trying to talk your way out of it. And the fact is, I'm not impressed by your attempts to sound important." The irony of his words hung in the air. Amanda had to bite her lip to keep from speaking out. She'd just read about Jenkins Technology Solutions securing a contract worth hundreds of millions, a deal that had made headlines in the technology sector. Sarah squared her shoulders, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She'd recognized within minutes that this wasn't about parking violations or court decorum. This was about power, and Judge Harrison's desperate need to assert his over someone he saw as an easy target. "Very well, Your Honor," she said quietly. "Would you like to proceed with your verdict?" The subtle emphasis on "your" wasn't lost on the more observant members of the courtroom. It carried the weight of someone who understood that true power rarely needed to announce itself. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his satisfaction at her apparent submission mixing with annoyance at her continued composure. He was about to deliver a judgment that would set in motion events far beyond his comprehension, events that would force him to confront his own prejudices in ways he never expected. Judge Harrison straightened his robes, savoring the moment before his pronouncement. The morning's frustrations had crystallized into a desire to exert authority over someone. Anyone. And Sarah Jenkins seemed the perfect target. "Ms. Jenkins," he began, his voice carrying the artificial patience of someone explaining something to a child. "This court has a duty to maintain order in our city. When people like yourself decide that parking rules don't apply to them—" "Objection, Your Honor," Sarah interjected calmly, causing several heads to turn. It wasn't often that someone interrupted Judge Harrison, and even rarer that they did so using proper legal terminology. "This is traffic court, Ms. Jenkins," Harrison snapped, his face reddening. "You don't get to make objections here. And that kind of television courtroom behavior only confirms my impression of your attitude toward these proceedings." Sarah's fingers moved to her phone, pulling up a specific section of the Illinois Traffic Code. "Actually, Your Honor, according to Section 11-208.3, subsection B3, I have the right to present evidence in my defense before judgment is rendered. I've attempted 3 times to show you the dashboard camera footage." The judge's jaw tightened. In the gallery, Amanda Chen furiously took notes, while the court reporter's fingers danced across her stenotype machine, capturing every word of this increasingly unusual traffic court session. "Very well," Harrison conceded through gritted teeth. "You have 30 seconds to present your evidence." His air quotes around the word evidence drew a disapproving look from the court clerk, who had been watching the judge's behavior with growing concern. Sarah connected her phone to the courtroom's display system, a capability she knew existed because her company had installed it. The screen flickered to life, showing crystal-clear footage from her car's dashboard camera. The timestamp showed her parking, and as the camera panned, a construction crane clearly blocked the restricted parking sign. "As you can see, Your Honor, the signage was completely obscured by construction equipment. Additionally," she swiped to another image, "I have documentation showing that the construction company failed to file proper permits for equipment placement that day, which directly contributed to the signage obstruction." Judge Harrison's face had progressed from red to purple. This was supposed to be a simple traffic case, a chance to assert his authority. Instead, this woman in a coffee-stained sweatshirt was citing traffic codes and presenting documented evidence like a seasoned attorney. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, her voice steady, "I've taken the liberty of compiling similar incidents from this construction site, affecting multiple other citizens." She gestured to a graph showing a cluster of parking violations in the same location. "This suggests a systemic issue rather than individual negligence." The courtroom had grown so quiet you could hear the ancient heating system wheezing in the background. The young public defender in the back row was frantically scribbling notes. He'd never seen someone handle a traffic court appearance with such precision. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel, the sharp crack echoing off the marble walls. "Enough. This is not a federal case, Ms. Jenkins. This is about a simple parking violation, and your elaborate presentation only demonstrates a determination to waste this court's time." He shuffled his papers aggressively, a vein pulsing in his temple. "I'm imposing the maximum fine of $500, plus court costs. Perhaps this will teach you that your fancy technology and legal citations don't put you above the law." Sarah nodded once, her expression unchanged. "I understand, Your Honor. Will you be providing a written explanation of your decision to disregard documented evidence of signage obstruction and unpermitted construction activity?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the courtroom recognized it for what it was, not a challenge, but a chess move, laying groundwork for something bigger. "Are you threatening to appeal a parking ticket, Ms. Jenkins?" Harrison asked incredulously. "Not at all, Your Honor," Sarah replied, reaching for her phone. "I'm simply creating a record of today's proceedings. I find that documentation is invaluable in unexpected situations." Her fingers moved across the screen, initiating a payment that would soon shock the entire courthouse. In the gallery, Amanda Chen had finally connected all the dots. She watched Sarah Jenkins with a mixture of awe and anticipation, knowing she was witnessing something historic. The judge's gavel was about to meet the immovable force of truth, wealth, and carefully documented evidence, and only one of them would emerge unscathed. Sarah Jenkins accessed her banking app with practiced ease, the same fingers that had written code protecting billions in assets now initiating a simple $500 payment. The courthouse's aging payment system pinged as the transaction began processing. Carol Martinez, the court clerk for 15 years, glanced at her monitor with the weary familiarity of someone who'd processed thousands of fines. Then her eyes widened. She blinked hard, certain she was misreading the notification. "Your Honor," Carol's voice quavered slightly, interrupting Judge Harrison's continued lecture about respect for the law. I think you should see this." "Not now," Harrison snapped, too invested in his monologue about civic responsibility to notice Carol's unusual breach of protocol. "As I was saying, Ms. Jenkins, your attitude today reflects a broader problem in society." "Richard," Carol interrupted again, using his first name for the first time in their decade-long professional relationship. "You really need to see this." The judge's irritation at the interruption melted into confusion as he read the payment notification. The transaction had come from the corporate account of Jenkins Technology Solutions, with a closing balance that showed more zeros than his annual salary. But it was the accompanying automated message that made his blood run cold. Payment authorized by Sarah Jenkins, CEO and founder. Amanda Chen, still in the gallery, couldn't contain herself any longer. "Oh my God," she whispered to the person next to her. "That's T.E.D. Sarah Jenkins. Her company just developed the quantum encryption protocol that the Pentagon is using." The whisper rippled through the courtroom like a stone dropped in still water. Foams emerged from pockets as people began searching her name. The young public defender's jaw dropped as he read Forbes' latest profile of her. Tech's hidden giant. How Sarah Jenkins built a $50 billion cybersecurity empire. Judge Harrison's face had lost all color. His hands trembled slightly as he processed the reality before him. The woman he'd been lecturing like a wayward teenager was featured in the Wall Street Journal just yesterday for preventing a massive international banking crisis. Sarah stood quietly, her mother's pearls now visible as her sweatshirt shifted. The coffee stain suddenly seemed less like sloppiness and more like the mark of someone who'd worked through the night protecting national interests. "I believe the payment has cleared, Your Honor," Sarah spoke softly, her voice carrying neither triumph nor accusation. "Would you like me to wait for a receipt?" The click of camera phones filled the silence. Someone in the back whispered, "Wait until Twitter hears about this." Judge Harrison could almost see his career crumbling before his eyes. "Ms. Jenkins," he started, his voice notably different. "Perhaps we should discuss this in chambers." "That won't be necessary, Your Honor," Sarah replied, gathering her things. "The matter is settled." She turned to leave, then paused. "Though you might want to review the documentation I provided about the construction company. Other defendants might not have the resources to challenge unfair citations." Carol Martinez watched Sarah walk toward the door, then turned to the judge with a look that spoke volumes. She'd witnessed his behavior toward minorities for years, but had never had the power to challenge it. Now, karma had arrived wearing a coffee-stained MIT sweatshirt. As Sarah reached the courtroom doors, Amanda Chen rushed forward. "Ms. Jenkins, I'm a law student focusing on tech policy. Your paper on blockchain governance was revolutionary." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. "Email me at the company. We're always looking for interns who understand both law and technology." She handed Amanda her business card. Simple, unadorned, with just an email address. The bailiff held the door open, fighting to maintain his professional expression. As Sarah passed, he whispered, "My daughter dreams of being a programmer. She's brilliant, but we can't afford." "The Jenkins Foundation has a scholarship program," Sarah replied quietly. "Application deadline is next month." Judge Harrison watched this exchange from his bench, the enormity of his mistake crushing down on him. He'd judged her by her appearance, her race, her gender. Everything except the content of her character and the evidence she'd presented. As the courtroom doors closed behind Sarah Jenkins, A local news reporter who'd been covering a different case was already calling his editor. By nightfall, this morning's traffic court session would become a viral story about prejudice, power, and the danger of assumptions. And somewhere in her office overlooking Lake Michigan, Sarah Jenkins would add another story to her mental collection. Tales of bias and barriers that fueled her drive to change the world, one line of code, one scholarship, one moment of justice at a time. By noon, the courthouse incident had exploded across social media. Amanda Chin's TikTok video, hastily recorded during the revelation, hit 1 million views within hours. Watch this judge realize he just fined America's most powerful black female CEO, became the trending headline that newsrooms couldn't ignore. In her corner office overlooking Lake Michigan, Sarah Jenkins watched the story unfold on multiple screens while leading a virtual board meeting. Her coffee-stained MIT sweatshirt had been replaced by a tailored blazer, but her mother's pearls remained visible against her silk blouse. Ms. Jenkins, her PR director, interrupted urgently. "We've got requests from every major network. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News." Sarah held up a hand, silencing the room. On her main screen, a more disturbing story was emerging. Independent journalists had begun digging into Judge Harrison's court records, revealing a pattern of disproportionate fines and harsh treatment toward minorities and women. The data painted a damning picture of systematic bias. "Angela," Sarah addressed her PR director, "before we respond to any media, I want a full analysis of Judge Harrison's last 5 years of rulings. Not just the racial statistics everyone's talking about. I want to know about the people behind those numbers. How many lives were impacted? How many families struggled to pay excessive fines?" The boardroom fell silent. They recognized that look in their CEO's eyes, the same expression she'd worn when she discovered gender discrimination in tech hiring algorithms and subsequently developed software to eliminate AI bias. Meanwhile, at his home, Judge Richard Harrison sat in his dark study, watching his career unravel on national television. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from the Judicial Review Board, colleagues, and surprisingly, his daughter Claire. "Dad, we need to talk." Claire's text read, "Remember when you questioned why I was wasting time learning to code? Sarah Jenkins' free coding program for girls is the reason I'm now a software engineer." The irony hit him like a physical blow. His own daughter had benefited from the generosity of the woman he treated so dismissively. As he scrolled through news coverage, a notification appeared. The Lake Shore Country Club, which had rejected him last week, was now frantically trying to reach him. Their sudden interest only highlighted the hollow nature of the social status he craved. Back at Jenkins Technology Solutions, Sarah was reviewing the courthouse's security footage with her legal team. The cameras, ironically, running on software her company had developed, had captured every microaggression, every dismissive gesture. "We could bury him," her lead counsel suggested. "The footage alone." "That's not who we are," Sarah interrupted, touching her mother's pearls. "Remember what my mother used to say. When they go low, we build elevators." She turned to her team. "I want to launch a new initiative. We'll call it the Justice Innovation Project." Her fingers flew across her keyboard, outlining a program that would provide technology and training to courthouses nationwide, ensuring that every defendant, regardless of appearance or background, would have equal access to present digital evidence. The project would include AI monitoring for patterns of judicial bias, with quarterly public reporting. As Sarah worked, her phone lit up with a message from Amanda Chen, the law student from the courtroom. Attached was a rough draft of a law review article analyzing the intersection of technology, bias, and judicial reform. Sarah smiled, recognizing the same fire that had driven her as a young coder. "Schedule a meeting with Amanda," she told her assistant, "and contact the dean of her law school. I want to establish a scholarship fund for students focusing on tech law and social justice." By evening, the story had evolved beyond a simple tale of comeuppance. Social media was alive with similar stories from other courts, other cities, The hashtag courtroom bias trended nationwide, with Sarah's incident becoming a catalyst for a larger conversation about justice and prejudice. In her office, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. Her mother in her housekeeping uniform, wearing those same pearls, smiling proudly at a young Sarah hunched over their first computer. "Watch this, Mom," she whispered, turning back to her keyboard. "We're about to change the game." Again. 3 days after the courthouse incident, Sarah Jenkins did something unexpected. She declined every major network interview request. Instead, she released a simple 2-minute video from her office, wearing the same coffee-stained MIT sweatshirt that had drawn Judge Harrison's scorn. "This isn't about one judge or one courtroom," she began, her mother's pearls catching the light. "It's about a system that judges books by their covers and then writes off entire chapters of human potential." The video, shot on her phone without professional editing, quickly outpaced the original viral courthouse footage. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison sat before the Judicial Review Board, watching his own courtroom footage on repeat. Each dismissive gesture, each interrupted explanation, each biased assumption played out in high definition, all captured by the very security systems Sarah's company had installed. "Judge Harrison," the board chair spoke gravely, "we've reviewed 5 years of your cases. The pattern is disturbing. The statistics were projected on the wall. Minorities received fines averaging 40% higher. Women were interrupted 3 times more frequently than men, and defendants wearing casual clothing faced significantly higher penalties." But before the board could announce their decision, Sarah Jenkins herself walked into the room. The board members straightened in their chairs. Her reputation preceded her. "I'd like to make a proposal," she announced, setting down a thick folder. Inside was a comprehensive plan for judicial reform, starting with their district. "Judge Harrison doesn't need punishment. He needs perspective." The judge looked up, confusion evident on his face. This wasn't the revenge he'd expected. "I'm launching the Justice Innovation Project," Sarah continued, "a $50 million initiative to modernize courtrooms and eliminate systemic bias. And I want Judge Harrison to lead the advisory board." She turned to face him directly. "After he completes an intensive 6-month program, working with the communities he's prejudged." The room erupted in whispers. The board chair leaned forward. "Ms. Jenkins, with all due respect, this man disrespected you publicly." "Yes," Sarah nodded, "and now he has an opportunity to help ensure it never happens to anyone else." She pulled up a presentation on her tablet. The program includes working at community legal clinics, attending diversity training designed by leading experts, and most importantly, listening to the stories of those affected by judicial bias. Judge Harrison found his voice. "Why? Why offer me this chance?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Because my mother taught me something valuable while she cleaned offices at night to pay for my computer classes. She said, 'Baby, if you want to change the game, you can't just remove the bad players. You have to help them learn to play better.'" The judge's daughter, Claire, who had been waiting outside, chose that moment to enter. "Dad," she said, holding up her laptop, "I want to show you something." On the screen was the code she'd written through Sarah's program for underprivileged girls, code that now helped protect domestic violence survivors by securing their digital footprints. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah addressed him informally for the first time, "your daughter is brilliant. She succeeded not because of the system, but despite it. Imagine how many other brilliant minds we lose because they're wearing the wrong clothes, or speaking with the wrong accent, or simply living in the wrong zip code." The Judicial Review Board watched this exchange in silence. They'd expected a demand for resignation, not an offer of redemption. "The choice is yours," Sarah concluded. "You can fight these findings, claim persecution, maybe even keep your position through sheer legal maneuvering, or you can help us build something better." Judge Harrison looked at his daughter, then at the damning statistics on the wall, and finally at his own reflection in the darkened window. The man looking back at him seemed smaller than he'd ever realized. "Where do I start?" he asked quietly. Sarah handed him a badge for the community law clinic in his district's poorest neighborhood. Monday morning, 8 a.m. Wear comfortable shoes. And judge. She paused at the door. Maybe leave the robes at home. Sometimes the best way to dispense justice is to walk a mile in someone else's shoes first. As she left the room, her phone buzzed with a message from Amanda Chen. The law student's article on technological solutions to judicial bias had been accepted for publication. Sarah smiled, knowing that change wasn't just about second chances. It was about creating first chances for those who'd never had them. 6 months later, Judge Richard Harrison stood in line at the same community law clinic where he'd started his redemption journey. His polished loafers had been replaced by comfortable sneakers, his judicial demeanor softened by half a year of humbling experiences. As he waited for his morning coffee, he watched Maria Rodriguez, a cleaning woman, struggle to understand her eviction notice. "Let me help," he offered in carefully practiced Spanish, remembering how Sarah Jenkins had insisted all advisory board members learn basic Spanish and Mandarin. "I'm Richard, one of the legal volunteers." Maria didn't know she was speaking to a suspended judge, and Harrison found freedom in that anonymity. It was easier to truly listen when no one was standing at attention before a bench. Across town, in her company's headquarters, Sarah Jenkins was reviewing the first quarterly report of the Justice Innovation Project. The data showed promising changes. Courtrooms using their new AI-powered bias detection system reported a 45% decrease in discriminatory sentencing. But it was the personal stories that moved her most. "Ms. Jenkins," her assistant interrupted, "Judge Harrison's daughter is here." Claire Harrison entered, carrying a laptop decorated with coding stickers. "We finished the beta version," she announced proudly. The screen displayed an app that helped judges review their own behavioral patterns, complete with AI-powered suggestions for more equitable practices. "Your father helped design this?" Sarah asked, noting the attention to practical details that only an experienced judge would consider. "He did more than that," Claire replied, pulling up a video. "He's been sharing his story at judicial conferences. Watch this." The video showed Judge Harrison speaking to a room full of judges, his usual aristocratic bearing replaced by genuine humility. "I spent 15 years looking down from the bench," he was saying, "but I never truly saw the people before me until I had to look them in the eye as equals." Sarah touched her mother's pearls, a habit that had become more pronounced as the project grew. The door opened again, and Amanda Chen walked in, now a full-time legal researcher for the Justice Innovation Project. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a social media thread. The thread featured stories from people who'd appeared in Harrison's courtroom over the years. But instead of complaints, recent posts told of a transformed judge who took time to listen, who considered circumstances, who used technology to ensure equal treatment regardless of appearance or background. "We're receiving inquiries from judicial systems in 12 countries, Amanda added. "They want to implement our bias detection software and training program." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out over Lake Michigan. Her reflection showed not just a tech billionaire, but her mother's daughter, someone who understood that true change required both holding people accountable and offering them a path to redemption. Her phone buzzed with a message from the community law clinic. Judge Harrison had just helped Maria Rodriguez successfully fight her eviction, drawing on both his legal expertise and his new understanding of systemic barriers. The message included a photo, the former judge and the cleaning woman sharing celebratory cups of coffee, their smiles equally bright. "Schedule a meeting with the International Justice Reform Teams," Sarah told her assistant, "and add Judge Harrison to the call. He's earned his place at that table." As if on cue, Richard Harrison himself appeared in her office doorway, looking different than he had 6 months ago. The aristocratic mask was gone, replaced by something more genuine. "Ms. Jenkins," he began, then corrected himself. "Sarah, I owe you more than—" "You don't owe me anything," she interrupted. "But there are thousands of people who come through our courts every day who deserve what you've learned. Are you ready to help change the system from the inside? Harrison nodded, pulling out a worn notebook. Inside were hundreds of names, stories, and insights gathered during his time at the clinic. I've been thinking about how we can expand the program, he said. There's this young lawyer at the clinic who has brilliant ideas about combining technology with compassion. Sarah smiled, recognizing the fire of genuine reform in his eyes. The man who had once judged her by her coffee-stained sweatshirt was now helping to weave a new fabric of justice, one that could stretch to cover everyone equally, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Well then, she said, gesturing to the conference room where Claire and Amanda were setting up for the international call, let's get to work. We've got a system to upgrade. 1 year to the day after the famous courtroom incident, the National Judicial Conference opened with an unprecedented scene. Sarah Jenkins and Richard Harrison stood together at the podium, their unlikely partnership now a symbol of transformative justice. The conference hall was packed with judges, lawyers, and tech innovators from around the world. In the front row, Amanda Chen sat beside Claire Harrison, both now leading their own divisions within the Justice Innovation Project. Maria Rodriguez, the former cleaning woman, was there too, now a community liaison for the project, wearing a translator earpiece provided by Jenkins Technology Solutions. A year ago, Sarah began, her mother's pearls gleaming under the lights. I walked into a courtroom wearing a coffee-stained sweatshirt. She paused, allowing a ripple of knowing laughter to pass through the audience. Today, I'm wearing Armani, but the lesson remains the same. Justice should never depend on what someone is wearing. She gestured to the massive screen behind her, where real-time data from courtrooms across the country flowed through their bias detection software. In the past year, we've seen a 60% reduction in discriminatory sentencing in participating courts. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Richard. Judge Harrison stepped forward, his transformation evident in both his bearing and his words. I was that judge, he admitted, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. The one who saw clothes instead of character, assumptions instead of evidence. But thanks to Sarah's vision of redemptive justice, I learned that being wrong can be the first step toward making things right. The presentation shifted to video testimonials. A Hispanic teenager who'd received coding training instead of jail time for a minor offense, a single mother whose traffic fines had been adjusted to reflect her income level, a refugee whose cultural context was now considered in court proceedings thanks to AI-powered cultural competency protocols. In the middle of their presentation, Sarah's phone buzzed. The Supreme Court had just announced they would be implementing the Justice Innovation Project's protocols nationwide. Amanda Chen grabbed Claire's hand, both women tearing up at the news. But our work isn't finished, Sarah continued, revealing the next phase of their initiative. Today, we're launching the Jenkins Harrison Fellowship for Ethical Innovation in Justice. She turned to the audience, because true change requires both the wisdom of experience and the courage to admit when that experience has led us astray. The fellowship would fund judges, technologists, and community advocates working together to identify and eliminate bias in the justice system. The first year's budget, $100 million. Richard Harrison took the microphone one last time. A year ago, I thought power meant wearing robes and wielding authority. Sarah Jenkins taught me that real power lies in the ability to transform adversaries into allies, prejudice into progress. As they concluded, Maria Rodriguez stepped onto the stage. In carefully practiced English, she shared how her experience with Harrison at the community clinic had inspired her to become a court interpreter. Now I help others be heard, she said proudly, because Judge Harrison learned to listen. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Later that evening, at a small dinner celebration, Sarah excused herself and walked to the hotel's outdoor terrace. She pulled out the same photograph she'd looked at a year ago, her mother in her housekeeping uniform, wearing those pearls. You were right, Mom, she whispered. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's helping them become better. Judge Harrison found her there, holding a gift-wrapped package. My daughter helped me understand what this means, he said, handing it to her. Inside was a framed piece of code, Claire's first successful program from Sarah's coding academy. Below it was a handwritten note, "Sometimes justice needs a reboot." Sarah smiled, touching her mother's pearls one last time, ready to get back to work. I heard there's a judge in Texas who just fined a woman in a hoodie who turned out to be. Harrison laughed, shaking his head. Let me guess, another hidden giant. Actually, Sarah grinned. She's a quantum physicist. Want to help me explain why appearance and intelligence aren't correlated? Lead the way, he replied, following her back inside where Amanda and Claire were already pulling up case files. After all, justice is just like good code. It needs constant debugging to work for everyone. And so, in a world that too often judged books by their covers, a coffee-stained sweatshirt had become the symbol of change, reminding everyone that true justice, like true character, runs far deeper than appearance.